My husband's hand was already raised in a toast when he saw me walk through the door. The champagne glass froze mid-air. His face, the one I had watched across the breakfast table for 6 years, the one I had memorized in every version of Happy and Tired and Distant, went completely, terrifyingly blank for a half second. Then the color rushed back into it, and not the good kind. He slammed the glass down on the nearest table so hard I heard the crystal ring from across the room. "What are you doing here?" he snapped, his voice cutting over the low jazz playing through the speakers. He was already moving toward me, straightening the lapels of his blazer, his jaw set the way it always got when he was furious and trying to look calm at the same time. "I told you this was a private event." He had told me that 3 days ago, standing in our kitchen, holding his coffee with both hands the way he did when he was delivering news he already knew I wouldn't like. "The opening is for investors and industry contacts only," he'd said. "I don't want it to feel like a family thing. It needs to feel professional." I was his wife. I had written the check that built this place from a vision board into 4 walls and a logo. But apparently, I was the family thing that needed to be kept out of the professional room. I hadn't argued. I'd nodded and gone back to my laptop, and he'd kissed me on the top of my head on his way out, and I had sat very still for a long time after he left, thinking about what I was going to do. Now I stood at the entrance of the showroom he had spent 18 months building with my money, wearing the blazer I'd worn to our first meeting with the bank. And I looked at my husband walking fast toward me across his own marble floor, and I felt nothing that resembled regret. I stepped to the side. Behind me, 2 officers from the county sheriff's department stepped forward. My husband stopped walking. "What is this?" he said. His voice had dropped about an octave. The lead deputy was a tall woman with a calm expression that communicated she had absolutely no interest in the emotional dynamics of the room. She held up her badge. "Sir, we are here to execute a court-issued writ of replevin authorizing the seizure of assets held under commercial lien. Please step back and allow us to proceed." He looked at the badge. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the 6 men in gray work shirts waiting by the door with hand trucks and moving straps. His business partner, the one who had been his best friend since college and had helped him pick the tile for the lobby floor, was standing near the bar cart with a glass of bourbon and an expression that suggested he was actively reconsidering several life decisions. The 3 commercial buyers my husband had spent the last 2 months courting, men in expensive coats who had flown in from Chicago and Charlotte and Denver specifically to see this showroom tonight, had gone very still near the window display, and along the back wall, the local press. 2 journalists and a photographer from the design trade publication that had agreed to feature the opening in their spring issue. Their cameras were already up. My husband turned back to me. His voice went quiet in a way that was worse than yelling. "You brought the sheriff to my opening." "I brought the county sheriff's department to my property," I said, "to collect my property." "Your property," he repeated. He said it like a question and a threat at the same time. The lead deputy stepped between us with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this many times. "Sir," she didn't raise her voice, "sir, I need you to back away from her and allow my team to work. If you interfere with this process, you will be arrested. Do you understand?" He understood. I watched him understand. He took 2 steps back, and his face cycled through several expressions I had never seen on him before, and then he straightened up and turned around to look at the room. There were 40 people in this space he had designed to impress. 40 people who had been holding champagne and talking about his vision and his aesthetic and his instinct for what clients actually wanted in a custom residential showroom. And now every single one of them was watching 2 sheriff's deputies and 6 movers walk calmly toward the center of his floor. He did what I expected him to do. He raised his hands and he smiled, the particular smile he wore when he was performing composure, and he turned to his guests. "Everyone, I'm so sorry about this," he said, projecting his voice with the easy confidence of someone who had spent years doing client presentations. "This is a private legal matter between me and my ex-wife. It's going to be resolved, it's not going to affect the business, and I want you all to keep enjoying the evening." He paused, let the smile deepen. "She can take whatever she came for. The heart of this company isn't furniture, it's the work." A few people nodded. The bourbon glass went back up. I saw one of the journalists writing something down. My husband looked at me with something that was almost satisfaction. He believed, genuinely, that he had just neutralized me. I waited for the noise in the room to settle back into itself. Then I opened my portfolio case. "You're right that the heart of the company isn't the furniture," I said. My voice was level. I had practiced this sentence in my car in the parking garage for about 4 minutes before I came in. I moved slowly toward him, and he held his ground because he was the kind of man who always held his ground, and I stopped about 3 feet away and I held up the document I had pulled from the case. The heart of the company is the design portfolio. The 6 signature collections, the brand identity, the proprietary process you've been selling to every client for the last 2 years. He blinked. Okay. I developed those collections, I said, before we were married, before the business existed, before you had a name for any of it. And I was so in love with you that when you said, "Let's build this together," I handed them to you with a licensing agreement I wrote on our kitchen table and never thought twice about. I slid the document across to the deputy, who took it without looking at my husband. That agreement had a clause. If we dissolved the partnership, and our marriage is the partnership, the license to use my design work reverts to me. All of it. Immediately. By operation of law. The room had gone the particular kind of quiet where you can hear people trying not to make noise. My husband's smile was gone. "What are you talking about?" he said. "That agreement was never legally—" "It was filed with the county clerk the week after we signed it," I said. "I had a lawyer look at it. You never have to see it after that." He stared at me. I looked past him to the 3 men in expensive coats near the windows. "Gentlemen," I said, "I want to be transparent with you tonight. Every product in this showroom, every design you've reviewed in the portfolio you were sent last month, every collection this company has built its reputation on, it is all currently the subject of a licensing dispute. Any commercial contract you sign in the next 30 days will need to be renegotiated once the courts confirm the reversion. That process takes approximately 60 to 90 days. I paused. "I just thought you should know before you commit." The man from Chicago put his coat on. My husband took a step toward me and the deputy moved so fast I barely saw it, just a hand on his shoulder, firm and immovable. "Sir." He stopped. His breathing had changed. I could see it in his chest. The movers were already working. They were unhooking the centerpiece display from the wall. 6 frame design renders, the ones his studio had reprinted at 4 feet tall for the opening. The images that were on every piece of marketing material he had ever produced. His business partner had set his bourbon down and was watching with his arms crossed and his mouth slightly open. "You can't take those," my husband said. His voice had lost something. The deputy glanced at the asset list. "She can," she said. "They're on the schedule." He turned to look at the room again, and I think he was looking for his partner, for someone who would step in and say something, for any face that offered him the alliance he expected to find there. His partner looked away. The 3 buyers were already moving toward the door in a cluster, their wool coats buttoned, their expressions closed and unreadable. My husband walked toward them. He was not begging, not exactly. He was too careful for that. But his voice had taken on a quality I had heard exactly once before, the night 3 years ago when his first major client almost walked away. "Wait. Gentlemen, please. This is a temporary situation. The IP dispute is something we can resolve in weeks. The work itself, the quality of what we do, that doesn't change. We've built 10 years of relationships in this industry. I want to show you the man from Charlotte stopped." He looked at my husband with the flat, evaluating look of someone who lends very large amounts of money and has learned exactly what risk looks like. "You have a design portfolio in litigation and a sheriff at your opening," he said. "That's not a temporary situation. That's a liability." He nodded at me almost politely and walked out the door. The other 2 followed. My husband stood in the middle of the room and watched the door close. I had expected this to feel like something enormous, victory or grief or both at once. Instead, I felt very calm and slightly cold, the way you feel after you've been holding your breath for a long time, and you finally stop. The movers were taking the display samples now, rolling them carefully in brown paper and loading them onto the hand trucks. The deputy was making notes on her clipboard. The guests who remained had pulled together into clusters near the walls, talking quietly, their backs angled away from my husband in the particular body language of people who are waiting for an appropriate moment to leave. His mother came out of the back hallway. I had known she was here. I'd seen her name on the guest list when my husband had accidentally left it open on the shared calendar 2 weeks ago. She was a small woman who had always managed to make me feel approximately the size of a business card, who had told me at our rehearsal dinner that my husband was marrying beneath his talent and had spent the 6 years of our marriage proving she still believed it. She saw the movers. She saw the deputies. She saw her son standing in the center of the room looking like a man trying to remember how to breathe. "What did you do?" she said to me. She wasn't loud. She was the kind of woman who had never needed to be loud. "I collected what belongs to me," I said. She looked at the movers, then back at me. Her face was doing something complicated that eventually resolved into fury. "You couldn't let him have this," she said. "You couldn't just walk away with your money and your pride and let him build something. You had to burn it." I thought about how she had called me the week after I told my husband I wanted a divorce. How she had said, very quietly, that I should think carefully before I made decisions that would reflect badly on my character. How she'd implied, without saying it directly, that the $340,000 I had invested in her son's business was a contribution I had made voluntarily and therefore had no particular claim to revisit. I turned to look at her. "I'm not burning anything," I said. "I'm just not leaving it behind." She crossed the room toward me and the lead deputy stepped forward, not touching her, just present, a physical fact between us. "Ma'am," she said, "I need you to let us complete this process without interference." My husband's mother stopped. She looked at the deputy. She looked at me. Something in her face cracked, not into sadness exactly, but into something older and more tired. She turned around and went back through the hallway she had come from without another word. The room finished emptying the way rooms do, in increments, the guests finding reasons and exits, the catering staff clearing glassware, the journalist packing her camera bag with the careful movements of someone who was absolutely going to write about this and wasn't sure yet how to feel about that. His business partner walked up to my husband, and they stood together for a moment, and then his partner said something I couldn't hear. My husband shook his head. His partner put his hand briefly on my husband's shoulder and then walked away toward the exit. My husband and I were the last two people standing in the room, besides the movers and the deputies. He looked at me across the stripped floor. The display wall behind him was bare. The centerpiece designs were racked and loaded on the truck. The room smelled like champagne and moving paper, and the particular scent of expensive things being taken apart. "Why didn't you just ask me?" he said. His voice was not angry anymore. It was something worse. "Why didn't you just tell me what you were going to do? We could have figured something out." I thought about everything I might say to that. I thought about the 11 months before I filed for divorce, the way I had tried to tell him what was happening to us in the vocabulary of a person trying to save a marriage, and the way he had consistently translated it into the vocabulary of a person who wasn't worried. I thought about the morning he called me from the showroom to tell me the opening date and mentioned, almost as an aside, that he'd decided I wasn't on the guest list. "I asked you for 4 years," I said. "I asked you in every way I knew how." He didn't have anything to say to that. I watched him look for something and not find it. The lead deputy came to stand beside me. "We're finished with the scheduled items," she said quietly. "You're clear to go whenever you're ready." I nodded. I picked up my portfolio case. I looked at my husband one more time and I thought, as I had thought every day for the last 11 months, that I had loved this man as completely as I knew how to love anyone, and I thought that it had not been enough to make him see me, and I thought that this was not something I could have fixed by trying harder. I walked out through the glass front door of the showroom, and the night air was cold and sharp and tasted like late February in Nashville, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment breathing it in before I walked to my car. 4 months later, the divorce was finalized in Davidson County Circuit Court on a Tuesday morning in June. My attorney had done exactly what she promised she would do. The design portfolio reverted to me in full. The $1,340,000 I had invested in the business was reclassified as a secured commercial loan because my attorney had found the email thread from 3 years ago in which my husband had explicitly called it a loan and promised to formalize the terms, which he had never done, which meant my attorney got to do it for him in court at a significantly higher interest rate. My husband owed me $340,000 plus 4 years of interest. He did not have $340,000. What he had was a showroom with bare walls and a business that could not market itself using designs it no longer had the rights to, and 3 commercial buyers who had declined to follow up after the opening, and a reputation in the Nashville design community that had shifted in the specific, permanent way that reputations shift. When someone has seen you get served legal papers at your own launch party, the judge issued a structured repayment order. A portion of any income my husband earned from the business or from any other employment would be directed to my holding company until the debt was satisfied. It would take, his attorney had told the court, between 8 and 12 years if everything went well for him. The judge had looked at my husband over the top of her reading glasses when she signed the order. Parties in proceedings like this one, she said, often express surprise at outcomes that were made inevitable by their own earlier decisions. I find that puzzling. She signed the order. That's all. My husband sat very still at the defense table while his attorney gathered the paperwork. He looked like a man trying to locate the exact moment when things had become unfixable, which I knew was a disorienting search because there wasn't one moment. There were hundreds of them. Tiny failures of attention, small decisions to look the other way, years of treating the structure of our partnership as something that would hold itself up without maintenance. Until it didn't. I did not look at him when I left the courtroom, not because I was angry. I had moved past angry somewhere around month 7 of the divorce process when I had understood, finally, that the way he had treated me was not something I was going to be able to explain to him no matter how carefully I chose my words. Some people can only understand what they've done when they're sitting with the consequences. I had given him the consequences. The understanding was his to find or not find on his own. 8 months after the court date, I reopened the showroom. I had negotiated a direct lease on the space. The landlord had been relieved to have a tenant with documented assets and no legal complications, and I had spent 3 months redesigning the interior from the floor up. Lighter. More open. The kind of space where people wanted to sit down and think about how they lived rather than standing around being impressed. I rehung my design collections on the walls. Seeing them there, in the space where I had once watched them be wrapped and loaded onto a truck, felt like something I didn't have a word for exactly. Not triumph, something quieter, like finishing a sentence I'd started a long time ago. The business I built in that space was different from what my husband had built. He had always been interested in the high-concept residential client, the person who wanted their home to be a statement. I was more interested in the client who was trying to figure out how to live well in an ordinary space, which it turned out was nearly everyone, which meant the market was significantly larger than he had ever pursued. Within the first 6 months, I had a waiting list. Within the first year, I had brought on 2 junior designers and opened a second project in Memphis. Every month, like a clock, a payment arrived in my holding company account for my ex-husband's garnished income. It was not a large payment. It would be coming for a long time. I thought about this sometimes when I saw it. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with a kind of clarity. Money has memory. It knows where it came from. And eventually, one way or another, it comes back. My mother-in-law sent me a card 6 months after the divorce was finalized. There was no return address. The inside said only, "I underestimated you." I kept it in my desk drawer, not as a trophy, but because I wanted to remember that people can surprise you, even at the end, even when it's too late for it to matter to anyone but you. I think about that a lot now. Standing in my own showroom in my own city, building something that belongs entirely to me. I spent 6 years making myself smaller to fit inside someone else's idea of what I was worth. It cost me time I'll never get back and money I fought for 2 years to recover. And I want to be honest about that because I think we don't say it enough. Leaving is not the hard part. The hard part is understanding, before you leave, that you deserve to take everything that was yours to begin with. The design is mine. The room is mine. The work is mine. And nobody is ever going to ask me to wait outside for it.